Hello everyone, welcome to the Sci-Fi Christian. I am Bendy Bono, and here it is, the final Dante video. If you have made it this far, congratulations. If you're just kind of hanging around, you haven't read the comedy yet, or you're in the middle of it, I hope that these videos have been helpful to you, maybe to, even if you're not going to read it, to let you know about this wonderful work, or better yet, to inspire you to want to read it at some point. But in any event, just speaking for myself, it has been a very fun experience leading this read along, and well, of course, it's fun to have it finished. It's of course with mixed feelings that we reach the end of Dante. But what an end it is. We'll break it all down in a minute, but I find that with the end of Paradiso, it in some ways, I think you have to get to the end of Paradiso to be able to then appreciate Paradiso as a whole, which I know if this is your first time reading it and you weren't planning on ever rereading the poem again, you're like, oh, well, that's helpful. But it's true, because I think that the beginning of Paradiso, Dante starts describing how what he sees here goes beyond words. And by the end of Paradiso, I think we maybe start to get a little bit of a glimpse of what he's talking about when he literally reaches the point where he can't describe what he has seen, can't even remember what he saw in order to put it into words, and it's this overwhelming experience. And for a writer who is so often an intellectual as well as a poet, as he just collapses into the glory of what it would be like to stand in the Beatific Vision, and doesn't even begin to try to capture what that would be like, and by refusing to capture it, probably comes as close as any artistic vision has ever come in terms of what it would be like to stand before God. And I find it to be just an overwhelmingly beautiful and powerful passage. It is my favorite part of the comedy. And in some parts, in some ways, it's the most vague. It's the most difficult to tell what's going on, because Dante freely admits he doesn't know what's going on, and that's the power of it. Just all of his poetic force is behind this passage as we reach the final cantos. And it's beautiful, it's remarkable. It's an extraordinary accomplishment of his. But anyway, we're maybe getting a bit far ahead of things. So here this week we read cantos 28 through 33. Now, Beatrice is still around for the first few cantos, as we see the premium mobile, where we see the angels, we see all of them reflecting God, and then I think it's in Canto 31, as they reach the Empyrean, the Empyrean being the, I forget what and I forget the word I'm reaching for, but I forget what the linguistic history, the etymology of that word is, excuse me. I think I know it comes from Greek, and I think it means like fiery heaven or something. It's this overwhelming vision of heaven where God actually is. And as they ascend to the Empyrean, which is above all of the spheres, St. Bernard takes over. St. Bernard being a particular choice due to his reverence for the Virgin Mary. See last video's discussion for some thoughts on the Catholic doctrine of Mary, and some of the ways I think Dante, even if you don't agree with those doctrines, gives us insight into why Mary is so important to all Christians. And so St. Bernard, because Mary is, it's through intercession to her that Dante is given the grace to then raise his vision beyond her and to God. Saint Bernard is a particularly apt guide for that. But before we get to the vision of God, then we see the divine rose unfolding, and it's a powerful image, one that's kind of tough to get your mind around. As Dante sees this rose begin to unfold, and all the thrones, thousands of thrones are there. We have the New Testament, or people after the New Testament on one side, people before the coming of Christ on the other. So we see characters like, of course, the Blessed Virgin. We see, Adam and Eve there. We see Abraham also sitting in their thrones. We see the baptized children, the children who, died prior to the institution of circumcision. And we just get this beautiful picture of all of the blessed, all of the saved, the saints sitting there in their thrones, within the presence of God, eternally looking upon him and being overwhelmed by the Beatific Vision that Dante will later describe. Interesting note with that, and this is kind of a tricky thing to get your mind around a little bit, that and one of the areas where Paradiso is very interesting and very challenging at the same time is that you'll remember that from the very beginning of this canticle, Dante said, well, we're going through the spheres, and I'm going to describe them as best they can, and then Beatrice, and maybe it's Beatrice that tells him, but it's passed along to us that, and Dante's aware that what he is seeing is not how things actually are. The blessed aren't spending their time walking around on the moon or on Saturn or the sun or anything like that. He's seeing a metaphor for how the blessed actually live. And then when we see the rose, this is at least closer to what they experience as their eternal bliss. So here we get a unmediated, or at least a less mediated version of what the blessed actually enjoy within the Empyrean, within the throne of God. And so in a sense, all the different characters actually appear twice in Paradiso. Once in their particular sphere, where we get them in a mediated version that is steeped largely in metaphor, and then once in the Empyrean, where they sit in their thrones before this rose. And so we get this wonderful vision of that, and then, Canto 33, like I said, just absolutely blows me away. I want to read a little bit of it. I'm not sure how far I'll go here with Anthony Esselin's translation, but I can't describe it. Dante says he can't describe it, but it's worth reading. So I'm beginning around line 67 in Esselin's translation. He says, "Summit of light that lift yourself so high above the mind of mortal man, restore some slightest shade of your theophany, and grant then to my tongue sufficient power to leave the palest flicker of your glory to readers of a later day and hour. For should something return to memory and sound but faintly in my verses here, the clearer will they see your victory." It's just what a powerful prayer of just, and it's almost a paradoxical moment, because Dante, when he is at the height of his poetic powers, as I really believe he is here, is also at his humblest and is acknowledging the failure of his poetry. His poetry falls shorter of the vision of God than it does of anything else that he tries to describe it, yet he does so with just this intense passion and glory. It's extraordinary. "Should I have turned my vision anywhere but to the living ray," that would be God, "I'd have gone blind, so piercing was the power I had to bear. Thus was I bolder, this I call to mind, to bear the mighty radiance that bloomed till my might and omnipotence were joined." His might and omnipotence being God's omnipotence there. So he's being completely engulfed in the vision of God. "O overbrimming grace, whence I presumed to gaze upon the everlasting light, so fully that my vision was consumed. I saw the scattered elements unite, bound all with love into one book of praise in the deep ocean of the infinite. Substance and accident in all their ways as if breathed into one, and understand my words are a weak glimmer in the haze." So he's essentially saying, there's a little bit of Aristotelian philosophy involved here, a little bit of scholasticism, but the gist of it is, he's seeing the natural order as it is meant to be, as it was always meant to be, uncorrupted, purified by God. The universal being of this band, that's God, I think I saw, because when that is said, I feel the bliss within my heart expand. One instant, more of my memories fade, than 2 millennia fade the bravery that made the sea god gape at Argo's shade. And so my mind suspended utterly, held its gaze, still immobile and intent, and ever kindled with my wish to see, before that light one's will to turn is spent. One is so changed, it is impossible to shift the glance, for one would not consent. That's extraordinary to me. That it's impossible to look away. You could not want anything but to gaze upon God. Because all good, the object of the will, is summed in it, for it alone is best, beyond defective, there, whole, perfect, still. Even for these few memories I've confessed my words are less than what a baby says, who wets his tongue still at his mamma's breast. Not that I saw more than a single face as I was gazing into the living glow, for it is ever as it ever was. But in my vision winning valor so, that sole appearance, as I changed by seeing, appeared to change and form itself anew. Within that brilliant and profoundest being of the deep light, 3 rings appeared to me, and be symbolic of the Trinity. 3 colors and 1 measure in their gleaming. 3 rings, 3 colors, 1 measure. God in Trinity, God in unity. As rainbow begets rainbow in the sky, so were the first 2, and the third, flame, that from both rainbows breathed forth equally. He's getting into some of the Trinitarian processions there. Alas, how feeble language is, how lame beside my thought, and for what I was shown, to call thought small would be too great a claim. O light that dwell within thyself alone, who alone know thyself, are known, and smile with love upon the knowing and the known. We could spend a whole video just on those 3 lines and the beauty of the doctrine of the Trinity expressed there, which is such a, in the Summa Theologica videos I do, I've been going through St. Thomas's treatise on the triune God for the last few months, and it just makes your brain explode. And then he just, the way that Dante is able to take that just most difficult of doctrines and encapsulate it there is absolutely incredible. That circle which appeared in my poor style like a reflected radiance in thee, after my eyes had studied it a while, within, and in its own hue, seemed to be tinted with the figure of a man. So that circle, this is describing the Son, Jesus. And so I gazed on it absorbedly, as a geometer struggles all he can to measure out the circle by the square, but all his cogitation cannot gain the principle he lacks, so did I stare at that strange sight, to make the image fit the areole and see it enter there. But mine were not the feathers for that flight, save that the truth I longed for came to me, smiting my mind like lightning flashing bright. Here ceased the powers of my high fantasy. Already were all my will and my desires turned, as a wheel in equal balance, by the love that moves the sun and the other stars. I don't know about you, but I just, and I apologize, if the reading an excerpt like that is boring to some people. I just don't know how else to talk about Canto 33 and what it means and what it does, and to just read it and let the words wash over you. It's that incredibly powerful. Now, the one thing I did want to talk about a little bit more here is I think that there's a very interesting parallel between the final cantos of Paradiso and the final cantos of Inferno. A little bit maybe with Purgatorio, but not to the same degree, because, in Inferno we spend those final cantos drawing closer and closer through the river of Cocytus, as we see the souls buried in the ice until we eventually come to the devil himself there. And here in the final cantos of Paradiso, we have very similar experiences. We see the souls of the blessed in the rows of the Empyrean as we draw closer and closer to God and the Beatific Vision. And the contrast between the two is so striking, because in the one case, Dante is able to describe Satan in all of his lurid detail, right? You remember that? You know, he's got 3 heads, and one is this color, one is that color. He's beating his wings, and the wings look like this, and his body looks like this, and, you know, and he's weeping, and it's pus and blood, and it's, you know, it's disgusting. But Dante has no problem being able to describe the devil, and yet when we get to God, you know, it's that I can't begin to scratch the surface of the surface of the surface. You know, I'm so far off in what I am able to say that it's just absurd, you know. I'm doing the best I can, but the best I can, even if you multiply that by 1,000, wouldn't touch the slightest bit. And there's a really powerful message there, I think, or theme at least, within the comedy, and that evil, for all that it is ultimately something we can get our hands around. You know, we can go down with Dante to Cocytus and the Ninth Circle and see the devil frozen in ice and understand every detail about him. You can't do that with God. The ultimate good goes so far beyond us. It is wholly inaccessible to us. And I think that says something to us about the human experience, doesn't it? I mean, you know, a lot of times I think, and maybe this even plays into the popularity of Inferno over the other 2 canticles, that we don't like to go beyond what we understand. You know, we want to keep things in the safe realm where they're easy and manageable, and we get them. And I think that if we're to be honest about the message of the comedy, when it comes right down to it, is that type of way of living is the road to our damnation. You know, in one sense, you could say that Dante's hell is a place where everybody understands everything about their immediate existence anyway. Where everything is understood and manageable and known. Where you can get your mind around everything, where nothing is hidden, nothing is obscured. And Dante's heaven is something where to experience it is to go so far beyond yourself, to be plunged into something you do not understand and could never understand, and to be at peace with that. You know, and I think the way we live our lives sometimes is very telling. Not to say that there's never a place for accessibility or anything like that. I mean, part of the point of this video is accessibility, to try and make the comedy accessible to more people. But it's like when we just stay there, when we only stay where we are, we only stay within what is manageable to us. And I think this is true of all walks of life, not just morality, but, you know, theology. How do you live your faith? What about your experience as, you know, a husband, wife, a son, daughter, friend, you know, whatever? Do you only stay within the manageable? What about your experience with art, and aesthetics, and everything? Do you only stay with what you already like, what you already get? Some of you I know watching this have you know, reading something like Dante is very much outside your comfort zone. And I'm sure there's places throughout the comedy you've struggled with that. But yet, I honestly believe that through that struggle, even if, you know, maybe it's not as much fun as reading the latest bestseller or whatever, but yet there's something about reading this poem, especially if you're somebody who doesn't usually read this stuff, where it has changed you. I truly believe that. I think a book like the comedy does change you because it draws you out of what you're used to and presents you a world that maybe is beyond your understanding. There's certainly a lot of things in the comedy I don't even begin to grasp. And I've read it many times. You know, it shows you a world and part of the human experience that you've never seen before, you've never experienced, and it makes you more human. And I think part of the theme of the comedy then, ultimately, is that that's a good thing. In fact, that, at least in part, is the road to salvation. And that if there's one surefire way to be damned, it's to simply stay where you are. as a person, to be unchanged, to be unmoved, to always insist everything be accessible and achievable and easily understood. And to me that comes through very well in these final cantos. So some food for thought. And maybe we let that serve as kind of our final reflection. One other thing I just wanted to point out with those other, comparing the approach to Lucifer with the approach to God and Inferno and Paradiso, is just the way that as we approach Lucifer, things get quieter and quieter and quieter. We have a few encounters with the sinners, but by the time we get to the last section of Cositus, the sinners are just buried under the ice. Right? They're not even able to speak anymore. And so it just, things just kind of die around him. Whereas we get the exact opposite in Paradiso, where everybody is full of life, and the angels are flying around the Beatific Vision, and people have their gaze fixed upon God, and this is a place where things are becoming more and more alive. It's a very powerful contrast. All right, so I think that's it for Dante for now. I have much more that I will say about Dante in future series, maybe through the Sci-Fi Christian, certainly somewhere down the road, and years from now, probably, because I have a lot of reading and studying to do, but I do want to do an exclusively Dante podcast, where we go through the comedy, line by line and everything. And maybe maybe nobody will actually want to listen to that, but I want to do it. So, but that's years down the road. But I'm sure that between now and then, there will be plenty of things to talk about with Dante. I am admittedly completely obsessed with the poem, and so this has been a wonderful experience for me, and will tide me over for a while. But I'm sure that I will be back with more Dante info sooner or later. If I can make one final recommendation to you guys, and maybe one future video could be, what are some of the other Dante resources or artworks or something that might be of interest to casual readers of the comedy. But if there's one book that would go on such a list that I would recommend, it's actually one that came out just about a month ago by a guy named Rod Dreher, called How Dante Can Save Your Life. And the gist of the book is that Rod Dreher was going through a time in his life of extreme anxiety that triggered some severe illness in him, to the point where he was basically, not necessarily dying, but completely immobilized in his life. He was, just no energy, very sick all the time. And so in addition to, dealing with doctors and everything, he's doing counseling and all that. And in the midst of this, he discovers the comedy. And he discovers it for really the first time. He hasn't read the comedy, maybe like in high school or college. And it's about his journey through reading the comedy and the way that plays a powerful role in his own recovery. I think it'd be a wonderful follow-up, especially if this is your first time reading the comedy, to touching on Dante. If you want more, you want a different perspective, I can't recommend the book enough. I finished it a couple weeks ago and I absolutely loved it. So, How Dante Can Save Your Life by Rod Dreher. Highly recommended. Go check it out. But anyway, so that's it for now. It's been a pleasure. And I'm Ben DeBone, and this is the Sci-Fi Christian.